Hey Reddit! I'm not sure why I've been holding onto this story for so long, but since it's New Year's season, I figured now is the perfect time to share it. This is the story of how I met my husband, Nick, on a cold, magical New Year's Eve when we were just kids. Well, I was 20 and he was 21. I'm 35 now, married to him with 2 beautiful kids, and every time I think about how it all started, it feels like a dream I never want to forget. So here's part 1 of our story. It was New Year's Eve, 2009. I remember it vividly because I didn't even want to go out that night. I was fresh out of a 3-year relationship that had ended in the messiest, most heart-wrenching way possible. Think midnight phone calls, tear-streaked journals, and way too much Ben and Jerry's. My best friend, Emily, decided enough was enough. "You're not spending New Year's crying over that jerk," she said, practically shoving me into her car. "We're going to my cousin's party in Brooklyn, and you're going to have fun if it kills you." At the time, I was convinced it would. The party was at this gorgeous, slightly crumbling brownstone on a quiet street in Park Slope. It was one of those places where every inch told a story: creaky wooden floors, faded Persian rugs, and books stacked haphazardly on every available surface. String lights draped across the ceiling gave the room this warm, golden glow, and music, something jazzy and upbeat, played from an old record player in the corner. The crowd was eclectic, too. Artists, students, and young professionals mingled like they'd known each other forever. Meanwhile, hovered awkwardly by the coat rack, trying to look invisible. Emily, of course, had disappeared within 5 seconds, chatting up someone by the fireplace. I was already counting down the minutes until I could make a polite exit. And then I saw him. Nick was standing by the punch bowl, laughing at something a tall guy in a plaid shirt had said. There was something magnetic about him, even from across the room. He wasn't flashy or loud, just effortlessly put together in a way that caught your attention. His dark brown hair was a little messy, like he'd run his hands through it a few too many times, and he wore a simple button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked comfortable, like he belonged there but didn't need to prove it. I tried to look away, because what was the point, but then he glanced in my direction. And smiled. Let me tell you, that smile was like sunlight breaking through the grayest of clouds. It wasn't just polite or casual, it was warm and disarming, like he'd been waiting for something interesting to happen and was happy it was me. "Who's that?" I whispered to Emily when she finally reappeared with a drink in hand. "Oh, that's Nick," she said, grinning like she already knew where this was going. "He's my cousin's roommate. Super nice guy, kind of a genius. Also single, in case you were wondering." I wasn't wondering, thank you very much, but now that she'd said it, I couldn't stop glancing his way. Emily, being the meddler she is, didn't waste any time. She grabbed my arm and dragged me over to the punch bowl, where Nick was still chatting with plaid shirt guy. "Nick, this is my friend Amanda," she said, all bubbly and obvious. "Amanda, this is Nick. You two should talk." I wanted to crawl under the nearest rug, but Nick just chuckled, leaning casually against the table. "Should we?" he said, raising an eyebrow at Emily. Then he turned to me, his hazel eyes sparkling with amusement. No pressure, though. I managed a laugh and mumbled something about Emily being terrible at subtlety. Nick grinned and said, "I don't know, I kind of like directness. Saves time." The ice was officially broken. We started talking, just casual stuff at first. He told me he was in his senior year of college, studying architecture, and I admitted I was still figuring out my major after switching 3 times. Instead of judging me or giving some canned advice, he said, "That's cool. It just means you're exploring. Not everyone finds their thing right away." That's when I realized he wasn't just good-looking, he was kind. The kind of person who listened, really listened, and made you feel like your words mattered. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything: favorite movies, embarrassing childhood stories, the weirdest things we'd ever eaten. I told him about the time I accidentally joined the wrong class in college and sat through an entire hour of advanced calculus, and he laughed so hard he almost spilled his drink. When the countdown to midnight started, I expected him to drift off to join his other friends, but he stayed by my side. As the room erupted in cheers, champagne corks flying, Nick handed me a glass he'd snagged from a passing tray. "To new beginnings," he said, holding it out. We clinked glasses, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The noise, the people, even my messy heartbreak. There was just him, looking at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. He didn't kiss me that night. He didn't ask for my number, either. But before I left, he found me by the door and said, "It was really nice talking to you, Amanda. Maybe I'll see you around?" And that was it. Just a simple, hopeful parting that left me wondering about him the whole subway ride home. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Nick. Every little detail of our conversation replayed in my mind. His laugh, the way he tilted his head slightly when he listened, the way his eyes seemed to light up when I said something he found funny. It was ridiculous, honestly. We'd only talked for a few hours, but somehow, he'd left this deep impression on me. I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him again, though. I didn't know his last name, didn't have his number, and Brooklyn felt like a universe away from my tiny apartment in Queens. So, I decided to chalk it up to one of those fleeting, magical New Year's moments and move on. Emily, however, had other plans. A week later, she casually mentioned that her cousin, Jason, was hosting another get-together. "You should come," she said, scrolling through her phone like it was no big deal. "Why? So you can throw me at Nick again?" I teased, trying to sound uninterested. She looked up with the smuggest grin. "I mean, he did ask about you." My heart did this embarrassing little leap. "He did?" "Yep. Said you were cool and funny. Also said you have great taste in movies, which means he has terrible taste because you hate good films." I smacked her arm, but inside, I was buzzing. The get-together was much smaller this time, just a group of about 10 people sitting around Jason's living room, eating pizza and playing board games. Nick was there, of course, looking just as effortlessly charming as before. When he saw me walk in, his face lit up, and he waved me over to the couch where he was sitting. "Hey, Amanda," he said, scooting over to make room for me. "Glad you could make it." I tried to play it cool, but I was probably grinning like an idiot. "Thanks. Didn't realize this was such an exclusive event." He laughed, and we started talking again like no time had passed. This time, the conversation went deeper. We talked about our families. He had an older sister who he absolutely adored and parents who'd been married for 30 years. I told him about growing up with my single mom and how she'd worked 2 jobs to make sure I never went without. "You must be really close with her," he said, his voice soft with understanding. "I am," I admitted. "She's basically my hero." He smiled at that, and for a moment, I thought I saw something deeper in his expression, like he wasn't just listening to my words, but really feeling them. The night went on, and I found myself completely at ease around him. When it was my turn to play Pictionary, I butchered my drawings so badly that everyone was in hysterics. Nick laughed the hardest, wiping tears from his eyes as he said, "Remind me never to hire you as my architect." "Hey," I shot back, pretending to be offended. "You haven't even seen my stick figure masterpieces." "I'll take your word for it," he said, grinning. At the end of the night, as everyone was getting ready to leave, Nick walked me to the door. "You're really fun to be around. You know that?" he said, shoving his hands into his coat pockets like he was nervous. "You're not so bad yourself," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. This time, he didn't let the moment slip away. "Would it be okay if I got your number? I'd really like to see you again." I gave it to him, my heart racing the entire time. For the next few weeks, Nick and I texted constantly. He was funny and thoughtful, always finding little ways to make me smile. One day, out of the blue, he sent me a photo of a beautiful building he'd sketched for one of his classes. "Thought you might like this," he wrote. It was stunning, a modern, airy design with lots of glass and open spaces. "Are you kidding?" "This is amazing," I replied. "You're seriously talented." "Thanks," he wrote back. I had a good muse. I practically melted. Our first official date happened about a month after that second party. He invited me to this tiny Italian restaurant in Manhattan, one of those hole-in-the-wall places with checkered tablecloths and the best lasagna you've ever tasted. We sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, while the candles on our table burned low. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I know we haven't known each other that long," he said, his voice steady but soft. "But I really like you, Amanda. Like, a lot. And I'd like to see where this goes, if you're okay with that." I was speechless for a moment, my heart doing cartwheels in my chest. Then I nodded, squeezing his hand. "I'd like that too." And just like that, we were officially something. But this wasn't just some whirlwind romance. Over the next few months, Nick showed me time and time again that he wasn't just sweet. He was reliable, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in making me happy. He remembered the little things, like how I always ordered extra cheese on my pizza or how I hated scary movies. He even started showing up to Emily's apartment when he knew I'd be there, just to, accidentally, bump into me. The real turning point, though, came a few months later when I hit a rough patch. The first few months with Nick felt like a dream. He wasn't just attentive, he was deliberate in everything he did. Every text, every thoughtful date, every small gesture felt like it came from a place of genuine care. It was the kind of relationship I never knew I needed. But just as I was settling into this new, blissful chapter of my life, reality came crashing down in a way that tested both of us. It started with my mom. She called me one evening, her voice unusually strained. "Amanda," she said softly, "I had a doctor's appointment today. They found a lump, and they're running tests." Time froze. My mom had always been my rock, the woman who worked 2 jobs to put me through school, who never showed fear even when life threw her curveballs. Hearing uncertainty in her voice was like seeing a crack in the foundation of a house you thought was indestructible. For the next 2 weeks, I was a mess. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't even eat properly. The thought of losing her consumed me. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach churned, half expecting the worst news. Nick noticed something was off almost immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked one evening as we sat on my couch, a movie playing in the background. I tried to brush it off. "It's nothing, just some family stuff." He didn't let it go. "Amanda, talk to me," he said, gently placing his hand over mine. "I can't help if I don't know what's going on." His voice was so steady, so full of genuine concern, that the walls I'd been holding up started to crumble. I told him everything: the tests, my mom's fear, my own crippling anxiety. As I spoke, tears started streaming down my face, and I hated how vulnerable I felt. Nick didn't say a word at first. He just pulled me into his arms and let me cry. He held me like I was something fragile, something worth protecting, and in that moment, I felt the smallest sliver of comfort pierce through the darkness. "We'll get through this," he said softly, stroking my hair. "You're not alone in this, Amanda. I'm here." And he meant it. Over the next few weeks, Nick became my anchor. He would text me first thing in the morning to remind me to eat breakfast, send me silly memes throughout the day to make me smile, and call me every night just to check in. On the day my mom had her follow-up appointment, he insisted on coming with me. The waiting room was suffocatingly quiet, filled with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the rustling of magazines. I was sitting there, clutching my mom's hand, my heart pounding like a drum. Nick sat on my other side, his presence calm and steady. He didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. He just stayed close, a reassuring hand resting lightly on my knee. When the doctor finally came out and told us the lump was benign, I burst into tears this time, tears of relief. My mom hugged me tightly, and Nick smiled, his eyes soft with shared joy. "See," he said, squeezing my hand. "Told you we'd get through it." That was the moment I realized Nick wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a partner, someone who didn't just stand by during the good times, but who showed up in the hard moments, ready to shoulder the weight with me. But life wasn't done testing us. About a month later, I hit a personal low. Work had become unbearable. I was stuck in a dead-end administrative job that drained me every day. On top of that, I'd been struggling with bouts of depression that I hadn't told anyone about, not even Nick. I'd always been the kind of person who prided herself on being independent, on handling her own problems. Admitting that I wasn't okay felt like failure. One evening, after a particularly bad day, Nick showed up at my apartment unannounced. He had a bag of takeout in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. "Thought you could use some cheering up," he said, flashing that warm, boyish grin of his. I tried to fake a smile, but he saw right through it. "Talk to me, Amanda," he said, sitting down next to me on the couch. "What's going on?" I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. But then I really looked at him. His hazel eyes were filled with so much patience and understanding, it broke something in me. "I'm not okay," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to fix it." Nick didn't flinch. He didn't try to fix me with some cliché pep talk or dismiss my feelings. Instead, he took my hand and said, "You don't have to fix it alone. We'll figure it out together." Over the next few weeks, he went above and beyond to support me. He helped me update my resume and start applying for new jobs, even spending hours researching companies he thought I'd love. He encouraged me to see a therapist, even offering to drive me to my first appointment because he knew how nervous I was. And through it all, he never made me feel like a burden. One night, after I'd finally landed a new job that I was excited about, I looked at Nick as he sat across from me at my tiny kitchen table, casually flipping through a magazine. Something shifted in me. I realized that I loved him, not just for the way he made me laugh or the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world, but for the way he showed up. In every moment, big or small, he was there. And I knew, deep down, that this was the kind of love I'd always hoped for. After Nick helped me navigate those dark months, our relationship deepened in a way that felt almost sacred. We weren't just a couple anymore, we were partners in every sense of the word. And while life continued to throw its curveballs, we faced them together, hand in hand. By the time our 5th anniversary rolled around, Nick and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We spent lazy Sundays exploring farmers markets, late evenings laughing over silly movies, and even rainy afternoons huddled together in coffee shops. Him sketching designs for his architecture projects while I read whatever novel I'd been devouring that week. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Relationships, real ones, take work. One of our biggest challenges came about a year before we got engaged. Nick had landed his dream internship at a prestigious architecture firm in Manhattan. It was the kind of opportunity most people would kill for, and I was so proud of him I could burst. But the reality of it was grueling. The long hours and demanding projects started to take a toll on him, and for the first time, I saw cracks in his usually unshakable demeanor. He'd come home late, exhausted and frustrated, dropping his bag by the door with a heavy sigh. I'd try to cheer him up, cook his favorite meals, leave little notes in his lunch, even surprise him with small gifts, but nothing seemed to break through his stress. One night, after a particularly rough day, he snapped at me over something trivial. I don't even remember what it was, something about laundry, I think. But it stung. "I'm doing everything I can to support you," I said, my voice trembling. "But you're shutting me out, Nick." He ran a hand through his hair, looking torn. "I know," he said finally, his voice heavy with guilt. I don't know how to handle this pressure. I don't want to fail." That broke my heart. Nick, the most capable and determined person I knew, was doubting himself. I stepped closer and took his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "You won't fail," I said firmly. "And even if you stumble, I'll be right here to help you back up. You're not in this alone, okay?" For the first time in weeks, he softened. He pulled me into a tight hug, burying his face in my hair. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Yes, you do," I replied. "You deserve everything, Nick." That conversation was a turning point for us. Nick started opening up more about his struggles, and we learned how to navigate the tough times as a team. It wasn't always easy, but it brought us closer in ways I never expected. By the time he finished his internship, he had not only impressed his firm enough to earn a permanent position, but had also gained a newfound confidence in himself. And I was right there beside him, cheering him on every step of the way. A few months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Nick took me to the park where we'd had one of our first dates. The leaves were a riot of oranges and reds, crunching under our feet as we walked. I noticed he seemed a little nervous, fidgeting with his jacket pocket and glancing at me with a sweet, anxious smile. When we reached a small clearing, he stopped and turned to face me. "Amanda," he began, his voice steady despite the flicker of nerves in his eyes, "these past 5 years with you have been the best of my life. You've been my rock, my cheerleader, my partner in every sense of the word. I can't imagine a future without you." And then he dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" I was so overwhelmed, I couldn't even speak at first. Tears streamed down my face as I nodded furiously. "Yes," I finally managed to choke out. "1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, a delicate gold band with a small diamond that caught the fading sunlight, and stood up to hug me. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, wrapped in each other's arms, the world around us fading into a blur of colors and emotions. The next year was a whirlwind of wedding planning, laughter, and love. Our ceremony was simple but beautiful, held in a small garden surrounded by our closest friends and family. As we exchanged our vows, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come, from 2 strangers meeting at a New Year's party to standing here, promising forever. But the best was yet to come. A couple of years into our marriage, we decided we were ready to start a family. I'll never forget the day I found out I was pregnant with our first child, a baby girl we named Sophie. Watching Nick hold her for the first time was like falling in love with him all over again. He was so gentle, so in awe of this tiny, perfect human we had created together. 2 years later, our son, Ethan, was born. Our family was complete, and our house was filled with the kind of chaos and joy that makes life worth living. Fast forward to today, and here we are, a family of 4 living in a cozy, sunlit house that Nick and I built together in more ways than one. Sophie is 7 now, a curious and imaginative little girl who loves painting and dreams of becoming an artist. Ethan, our energetic 5-year-old, is a miniature version of Nick, always building things out of Legos and telling me he's going to design the tallest skyscraper in the world. Our home is lively, filled with the sounds of laughter, occasional sibling squabbles, and the constant thud of little feet running through the hallways. It's not always perfect. Parenting is messy and exhausting, and there are days when we collapse into bed wondering how we'll do it all again tomorrow. But every night, as we tuck our kids into bed and steal a quiet moment for ourselves, I'm reminded of how lucky we are. Nick is still the same steady, thoughtful man I fell in love with all those years ago. He's flourishing in his career now, having recently started his own architecture firm. Watching him pursue his dreams with the same passion and determination that first drew me to him is nothing short of inspiring. And I do everything I can to support him, just as he's always supported me. Some days, that means managing the chaos at home so he can focus on a big project. Other days, it's sitting with him late at night, brainstorming ideas and offering a fresh perspective. He tells me I'm his secret weapon, the person who keeps him grounded and motivated. But the truth is, he's the one who's kept me going through every challenge life has thrown our way. We have our traditions now, Saturday morning pancakes with the kids, family movie nights where we all pile onto the couch, and anniversary dinners where Nick insists on cooking even though he's terrible at it. It's become more of a comedic ritual than anything else. Looking back, it's incredible to think about how far we've come. From that serendipitous New Year's Eve meeting to navigating life's highs and lows together, our journey hasn't been perfect, but it's been ours. There's a moment every evening, after the kids are asleep and the house is finally quiet, when Nick and I sit on the porch with a cup of tea or a glass of wine. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence, watching the stars. And every time, I find myself overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude for the life we've built together. For the man who has loved me so fiercely and unconditionally. For the family we've created and the home we've filled with warmth and love. I don't know what the future holds, but if these years have taught me anything, it's that we can handle whatever comes our way. Because at the heart of it all, we have each other. And that's enough. That's our story. It's messy, colorful, full of twists and turns, but it's real. And as I sit here typing this, listening to Sophie giggle from her room and Ethan shout something about a Lego emergency, I can't help but smile. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours. And that's the most beautiful thing I could have ever hoped for.